Welcome on into the Ostrom Avenue podcast. Johnny Gadamowitz, Ethan Frank on hand with you. And we're joined today by a very special guest, Tony Wheeler of Inside Maryland Sports. Tony's coming on to help us preview the upcoming matchup this weekend between Syracuse men's lacrosse and number one Maryland. Tony, how you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, Johnny and Ethan. I appreciate it.
So happy that you could join us. We got a lot to talk about. So without further ado here, let's hop right in. It's a UMD team that has really dominated two pretty high quality opponents to get the year started. What sort of has been some of the big reasons behind this early season success for the Terps?
It always comes down to, at this point for Maryland, the experience and the talent that they have. And when you're talking about a coach like John Tillman and his staff, what they have done is they've created a culture, a very strong culture around really selflessness. When they talk about be the best, which is that tagline, the moniker that the program has adopted, it infuses everything they do. So the ability to bring in highly rated recruits, highly regarded transfer students, and I'm sure you might have questions later about the portal additions that they've brought in. The ability for Coach Tillman to get someone, for example, like Bubba Fairman, who, has received All-American accolades as a midfielder, to now volunteer to become a short stick defensive midfielder. That kind of ethos permeates the culture. And what that does is it creates a condition where the players share the ball. And what you'll notice about the Maryland offense, you lose Jared Bernhardt. How do you replace the all-time leading scorer in program history? It appears you replace it by having six elite people on the field at all times who don't care about who scores the goal. And that really has triggered the really offensive explosion that you've seen through two games. First time in program history that they've scored 20 goals to start the season, 2 consecutive games. First time that they've scored back-to-back 20 goals since 1995. So that culture, the selflessness of the program, it really permeates through everything they do, and it gets that team playing as a whole as opposed to individual pieces.
So you mentioned the culture and Tillman and what he's done, bringing players in, but on the field, what makes him, I've heard him been called the best coach in the country. So on the field, what makes him such a good teacher and motivator of his players?
It's such a great question, Ethan. And if you were to talk to Coach Tillman, he would actually describe himself as an educator. He doesn't really think of himself a lot of times as a coach. He views himself as an educator of young people, and he talks quite a bit about young people. What he does, I think what his real skill is, aside from building this infrastructure, this culture that he has, this infrastructure, he's very, very good at developing one-on-one relationships. So he's really able to connect with each individual player where that player is. So he's very good at identifying this player's motivation, what motivates this specific person that may not motivate another member of the team. And it's that connection he has. Now, of course, he surrounds himself with 2 really, really good assistant coaches. Jesse Bernhardt, phenomenal defensive coordinator, Bobby Benson, phenomenal offensive coordinator. And those 2 assistant coaches, of course, are really good at developing game plans and those things. One thing I want you to also notice if you get a chance this weekend, when you see him on the sidelines, Coach Tillman, he's not a yelling and screaming kind of rah person. He's more cerebral, I think. I think he spends a lot of time talking to players individually about what he's seen and giving them very good real-time developmental feedback. And so it's very different. He's not a yelling and screaming kind of person. He's very much one-to-one, having these conversations with his players in real time. And I think that's what he does. I think that's what he's really, really good at.
When you look back, obviously, the way last year ended and the way it did in the national championship game against Virginia, do you get the sense that this is sort of, a team that's back for unfinished business? Or because of losing Bernhardt, you bring in a couple new faces, does it kind of feel like it's a clean slate and last year is out of the window at this point?
What Coach Tillman and what the players will tell you is that last year's over and they've learned from it and they've moved on. One thing I'll tell you that even from week 1 to week 2 is that this team is very, very much locked in every week about who they're playing. And I don't want to say that they're making up these kind of perceived slights or grievances, because they're not, but they were clearly not happy with how they performed against High Point, the defense, clearly unhappy. After that game against High Point, they immediately started talking about Loyola. Immediately, how 5 minutes later, they're not even talking about a win they just had where they scored 21 goals. They immediately were talking about how unhappy they were with their defensive performance and how they can't play that way against Loyola. Then they come out and they hold Loyola to 8 goals. A team that was up against Duke in the quarterfinals with a minute left, and they end up losing to Duke in overtime to go to the Final Four. They return 99% of their production, and Maryland literally blows the doors off of them. And they're already talking about Syracuse, right? So they have this really interesting ability to keep every week as the big game. I'd feel a little remiss if I didn't bring up one kind of interesting thing that a lot of us Maryland fans talk about. Very, very eerie connections to 2016 and 2017. 2016, a lot of people thought the Maryland's team in that year was the best Maryland team in probably more than a decade. They get to the championship game and they lose a heartbreaking game to North Carolina. Chris Cloutier, carries UNC to a title. Maryland loses that game in overtime. They come back the next year, Matt Rambo's, Colin Heacock's senior year, they win a title. People still think that 2016 team was better. There's a little interesting narrative that we talk about as Maryland fans, that we think this might be kind of similar, that last year is this team that everyone was convinced was this historic team. And statistically, they probably were for a Maryland program. And they lose this heartbreaking game to UNC. And now they're back in the next year. So to your point about, is this unfinished business? They would tell you it's not. It certainly feels like there's this unfinished business, and that this team very much is on a mission. And even the new players, John Donville and Keegan Kahn and Owen Probilski, when you talk to these guys, they even talk about this kind of, they want to win a championship.
Sounds a little bit, going back to what you said in the first part of the answer, like watching Michael Jordan from The Last Dance, just making up motivations for each opponent week in and week out. But, coming off such a strong, you wouldn't say they're having like a hangover of any expectations, because people are saying Maryland should be the best team, but they just haven't been able to get it done.
As a lifelong Maryland fan, I can't tell you how many times I've been in person in national title games to see them not win the title, right? We're kind of like Mets fans or something, or maybe Cubs fans. We kind of feel like we're cursed. Coach Tillman and his staff and his senior leadership, they've bought into this idea about being the best, and about what they do every day matters in the classroom, doing community service work, about being better people. And I really do think this buy-in on that cultural dimension keeps them really focused every week. And yes, it's a great program. They've had amazing teams. They have fallen short a lot of times, right? They make it to the championship, they make it to the Final Four. They're right there, and they don't take that next step. Does it affect them long term? My sense is that it never really does. My sense is that the new season starts, fall ball kicks in, and they've processed the previous year, and they really are focused on getting back to Memorial Day, getting back to that title game, and then seeing what happens, right? They got to get there, and then we'll see what happens. But I think the expectation is always that Maryland is going to be there.
We have two Mets fans on hand, and Ethan and myself, so that comparison certainly rings loud and clear.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that to you.
No, it's okay. Tony, I'm curious about Logan Wisniewski, and forgive me if I butchered that pronunciation, but he seems like the guy that has sort of stepped up, at least through 2 games so far, to be that alpha male when you're in the offensive zone with the ball in his stick. What makes him so dynamic, and how do you hope to contain him defensively?
And Syracuse, some of the Syracuse fans will remember he started his career out at Syracuse. He redshirted his freshman year, and then he transferred back to Maryland. One thing that's interesting about Logan, and you can actually go on Twitter or Google it, Logan can dunk a basketball. In high school, Logan was a record-setting quarterback for his high school program. So sometimes people think that Logan's not this elite athlete. He has a very underrated athletic skills. What you'll notice about Maryland's offense and the way they share the ball is that these players have a very, very high understanding of space on the field. Logan is amazing at finding these open spots, but his teammates are amazing at finding him. So Maryland's offense is not so much predicated on a lot of off-ball movement, cutting and picking and off-ball cutting and picking. What Maryland's offense is really predicated on is someone drawing a slide. So you're going to always see a dodger drawing a slide. Once that slide happens, the ball is going to move very quickly. And Logan always seems to be that player that's finding the one spot where the defense has broken down and one of his teammates is finding him with the ball. And he's an unbelievable shooter. If you're going to let him get his hands free from 10 yards in, the goalie's probably going to have to be getting the ball out of the back of the net. He's just that good at it. One other thing about Logan that makes him really, really hard to defend is that he's an ultra competitor, super, super competitive person. And he's going to fight through screens. He's going to fight through stick checks. He's going to put his shoulder down. He's going to get his shoulder into a defenseman's, midsection so they can't get their hands on him. And he's just all about trying to win that matchup, win the game. And so that competitive piece to him is really important because he's willing to win in a lot of different ways. When you look at his statistics, he's going to score goals, but he's also leading the team in assists. So he's an amazing distributor, and he doesn't get a lot of credit for that. He's amazing at finding open players.
Just sort of following up on that, do you think rolling into this weekend, obviously you had mentioned that he spent his first year at Syracuse. Do you think there's going to be a little bit of extra motivation for him personally? And if I could, do you one further, back in that 2017, 2018 year when he was with Syracuse and didn't really see the field, obviously he's from Maryland, just sort of how, as far as you can remember, how did that timeline shape up and the transfer news of him deciding to come back home?
It was a big deal because he was a highly rated recruit. So when he left Maryland to go up to Syracuse, it was definitely, oh wow, they're losing this great player. And look, there's a lot of scuttle that goes around about why he transferred, right? Did he want a red shirt? Coach Desko was sort of renowned for redshirting players to develop them so that by the time they're into their third, fourth, fifth years, they're really well seasoned, really well, conditioned lacrosse players. I've never talked to Logan about it, and I guarantee you, if you asked him about it, he's going to tell you he enjoyed his time at Syracuse, that he loved being up there, but that Maryland was, he wanted to get back closer to home and it was a better fit. He probably would never admit to this being like kind of a revenge game or going back up to the dome. And, he would probably never say that at all. And I'd believe him. I don't think he really thinks that way. But definitely getting him back out. I will tell you, when he did transfer back to Maryland, no one thought that he'd be starting his redshirt freshman year. And if you go back to that season when his redshirt freshman year, it was a surprise that he was as productive as he was. No one thought he was ready to take on that kind of role as a redshirt freshman. But he's been in the starting lineup ever since.
So outside of Logan, for our Syracuse listeners who aren't as familiar with the Terapins, who else are a couple of attackers that the Orange defense needs to keep an eye on that could put the ball in the net? Because as you talked about before, the Terps have been scoring at will through their first couple of games.
Yeah. One thing to notice about the Maryland, the starting six, right? The starting attack and the starting midfield. all 6 were high school attackmen. And Maryland's offense is really positionless. You're going to find Logan Wisniewski up at a traditional midfield spot. You're going to see Jonathan Donville, the transfer from Cornell, the graduate student from Cornell, who's the #1 pick in the NLL draft. So he's got good inside finishing skills. You're going to see Jonathan Donville down in the crease. You're going to see Anthony DeMeo, who nominally is a midfielder. You're going to see him initiating from behind the goal. Keegan Kahn, the transfer from Villanova, he'll play at X, but you'll also see him shift up to a wing. Eric Molliver is a sophomore. He's been starting at attack. Two-handed player. I still don't know if he's a dominant right-handed or left-handed player. He played midfield last year as a freshman. He's on the second line midfield. You'll see him operate at X, but you'll also see him on a wing. You'll see him finishing wing shots. So the offense is really positionless. You're going to see nominally the midfielders invert regularly. You're going to see the attack players up at midfield all the time. So the fluidity of the offense really requires players who can play anywhere on the field, who can handle the ball in any position. The second line midfield, for example, they have 8 goals through 2 games. And one of the big reasons why is a guy named Owen Murphy, who is a transfer from Johns Hopkins. He sat out last year, but during the COVID year, through a couple games, actually led Hopkins in scoring as an attackman. He's playing second line midfield now. He's got 6 goals through 2 games. So you're going to see players moving all over the field. You're going to see them initiating from kind of everywhere on that field. But that starting midfield line, Jonathan Donville, great shooter, but it's going to finish in the crease. Anthony DeMeo's got a great left-handed shot, but you're going to see him, playing behind the goal quite a bit. So it's a really fluid offense.
Tony, obviously there's not a lot to nitpick when you're looking at the #1 team in the country, but if there was sort of one area that Syracuse can hope to maybe exploit and take advantage come Sunday, what is it? Is there one?
I've been operating on this hypothesis for the last 2 years, and maybe the guy that runs Lacrosse Reference can put together an algorithm to test it out. But I've been operating on this hypothesis that if Maryland gets to 50% at the faceoff X, if they get to 50% in goal, and if they clear it above 85%, the offense is too good. It's right now, statistically, after 1 game, Syracuse is statistically the top efficient offense. But Maryland's offensive efficiency is pretty unbelievable now. They're consistently at 45% on adjusted offensive efficiency. For Syracuse to win, Fopp is obviously going to have to do well. He's going to have to win possessions. If he has a game like he had against Holy Cross, Syracuse has more than a puncher's chance because Syracuse athletically can absolutely score goals and run past anyone on Maryland's defense. Loyola had problems running past Maryland defenders, midfield and attack. Syracuse doesn't have that problem. Siebold can run past his defender. Tucker Dordevic can get anywhere he wants on the field. So Syracuse has the athletes. Can they get possession enough? The one thing I'd be worried about if I was Syracuse, got to keep your turnovers down. I know last year that was a problem. Didn't look like against Holy Cross that Syracuse had many turnover problems, but when you're blowtorching a team, 28-5, the other team's got a lot of issues. Maybe Syracuse didn't need to worry about turnovers so much. If they can get a good performance from Fopp at the faceoff X, Logan McNaney in goal for Maryland, he's just steady. He's kind of one of these kind of low floor or high floor kind of goalies. He's not going to give up a ton of goals. The Maryland defense does a really good job of giving him shots he wants to see. Syracuse shooters, though, there are a lot of good shooters on that Syracuse team. They can put pressure on McNaney. You saw the UVA game last year, the shooting performance that Schellenberger and Moore had. Syracuse can replicate that pretty easily. So it's going to come down to possessions. And I think Fopp at the X is going to he's going to play a huge role in that game. If Syracuse can keep the turnovers down, they absolutely have the offensive firepower to turn this game into what I think is probably going to be kind of one of these 18-17 kind of games.
So from the Maryland goalie to the Syracuse goalie situation, that's kind of been the talk of the town with the team since Bobby Gavin decided to transfer from Virginia to Syracuse. And both of Syracuse's goalies played last week against Holy Cross. They split time, one in the first half, one in the second half. How does that affect, preparation if you're on Maryland, because you don't know if one's going to play or the other's going to play, or if they're going to be interchangeable? How does that, affect Maryland in their prep for Saturday or Sunday's game?
That's Ethan, that's a great question. I don't know if there's an answer to it. And to be honest, I'm not sure how much Maryland shooters pay attention to it. Maryland's putting 71% of their shots on goal through 2 games last year, and that's not an anomaly. Last year, I think they led the country in shot on goal percentage at 68% or so for an entire season. So whoever is in goal, they're going to see a lot of shots. This is not a Maryland team. The narrative about Maryland, especially under Coach Tillman at the beginning of his career at Maryland, is that they played slow. This is not a team that plays slow. In fact, one way that last year Big Ten teams tried to attack Maryland was to actually take the air out of the ball. High Point and Loyola, which traditionally have been kind of up-tempo teams, decidedly tried to eat into the shot clock. Teams don't really want to run with Maryland because of the way Maryland shares the ball. So for Maryland, I think what's happening, doesn't matter who's in goal, they're going to be looking for close-in shots. You're not going to see a ton of crazy outside shooting from Maryland. You're going to see a lot of shots, 6-7 yards out. Syracuse is going to have to be really good at getting to people's hands. And, Maryland chased 3 goalies last week against Loyola. In that second quarter, they went on a 10-3 second quarter run. They chased a really good starting goalie. Backup goalie comes in, his first 2 shots, he's getting out of the back of the net. And then second half, they put their 3rd string goalie in. So I think for Maryland, they probably focus on what they can control, which is trying to shoot the ball through the net.
All right, Tony, last one we got for you here. So what's the biggest thing that you're going to be keyed in on this weekend, the X factor, if you will? And then if we could trouble you for a prediction, you don't have to give a score if you don't want, but how do you see Sunday's matchup shaking up?
I'm going to be really, really interested in 2 things. Number one, how does Maryland handle being in the Dome? Last year, Maryland played a Big Ten only schedule. They didn't have any regular season road games. The first time they actually, left the conference to play like even on a neutral field was in the second round of the NCAA tournament when they went on the road for the quarterfinals. So yes, they were going to Penn State last year. Yes, they went to Michigan last year, but those are very, very familiar venues for the program. I don't think Maryland's played in the Carrier Dome since the early 2010s. It's been a while, and I think that was in the playoffs. So seeing how they adjust to being in one of the most storied lacrosse venues, in the country, that's going to be interesting to see how they handle that road trip in that environment, especially playing against a Gary Gait coach team. I will not lie to you. I am giddy at the possibility of even seeing Gary Gait, in person. And so I think that piece I'm going to be paying attention to. I'm also going to be really interested to see if Syracuse decides to run or if they decide to do what other teams did and take the air out of the ball. If Syracuse gets into an up and down game, I think that really plays more into Maryland's hands than not. But Syracuse has the athletes and they've got the face-off player to maybe play their game and to try to run. So I'm going to be looking at the pace, and I'm going to be looking to see how Maryland handles being in the Carrier Dome, especially on a day where they're inducting people into their Ring of Honor. It's going to be a big crowd. I think that's going to be a really, really interesting kind of sub storyline. In terms of prediction, I do think Maryland's going to win the game. I think it's going to be close. I don't remember what I saw the spread at, 4 or 5 goals or something. I don't know about that, but I could definitely see sort of like a 20-17 kind of game. I think it's going to be high scoring. I think Syracuse is going to be in the game. I don't think there's going to be a point where Maryland goes on some crazy run that Syracuse doesn't respond to. I think it's going to be a close, fun, exciting game.
All right. Well, there you have it. Previewing Syracuse and Maryland. That was Tony Wheeler of Inside Maryland Sports. Tony, thanks so much for coming on. We really can't thank you enough. That was awesome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Syracuse takes on Maryland this weekend on Sunday, a noon face-off. You can catch it on WAER. Again, our pregame coverage gets rolling with GZA countdown to face-off at 11:30 a.m. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the Ostrom Avenue podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify, you name it. We're also on YouTube as well. So for everyone on video, hey, continue to subscribe. Check us out on YouTube. Leave a like, comment, whatever you want to do. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Ostrom Avenue podcast with Ethan and Tony. I'm Johnny, and we'll talk to you next week.